Hey everybody, I just finished this personal project here. It's a portfolio piece, and I'm going to do a couple videos on this, starting with a walkthrough of sort of the high level of the process that went into making this, and then I'll do some individual tutorials about some of the specific steps that I thought made this successful. And so let's start the walkthrough with the first step for me, which is always gathering reference and doing concept art. So I discovered this style that I've been a fan of for a long time. Actually has a name, which is cassette futurism. I love stuff like the Nostromo from Alien, old Star Trek, sort of like nuclear control room type environments. And so for concept art, I just gathered a bunch of images from Google image search, and I did some photo bashing, threw things into Midjourney, and came out with this set of images that I used as concept art. From that concept art, I always do an environment breakdown and analysis. So we analyze the scene, figure out what we need to make, and make a plan for how we're gonna make it. For this, I analyze the overall environment as well as the console itself, because the console is almost like a mini environment. And from that analysis, what I want to generate is a list of assets and a list of materials. And then getting a sense of, like, for both assets and materials, what's a hero and what can be reused. For materials, it's like tiling stuff. And for assets, it's like what's in the kit and what's a hero. Because that's going to inform sort of how I start to make things. So after the analysis, I'm starting with a blockout, and here I'm just trying to get scale, proportion, the big shapes, the readability, all that kind of stuff. I'm also refining the analysis that I did because I'm not working one-to-one with any of these concept images. I'm sort of just piecing things together that I like from each of them, and so there's a lot of stuff I can do. I'm just playing around with different elements, different sort of like textures and all that kind of stuff. I'm also establishing like a really basic mood with the lighting. I'm looking at camera settings, sort of like aspect ratio, film back, what am I going to use? I used 239 in this. I thought it looked cool. And I'm setting up cameras just to see what's interesting, setting up some angles that I want to use to tell the story and show off the environment, which is also going to help me figure out how much work I actually have to do. We're obviously going to spend time on what the camera sees, and we don't want to make too much more of the scene than we have to. And so this is going to give me an idea of what I need to focus on. What's close to the camera, what's far away. Things that are far away usually need a little bit less attention to detail, and all that kind of stuff. So just feeling that out with the layout. With the analysis and the layout done, I made a plan for building the actual scene. I usually start with the modular assets, but I decided to go a different way with this and do sort of high risk, high yield hero assets up front. Those were the foreground console, the character, and the tree. And then I moved on to trim sheets, modular pieces, details, lighting, and rendering. I did the foreground consoles because they're kind of going to set the tone for the look of the rest of the scene. There are a few art direction things I wanted to try, like the wood and chrome, like an old TV, stuff like that. Then I knew if they didn't work on the console, they wouldn't work anywhere else. I also wanted to start developing the textures for this and build smart materials so that I could use those across the project to keep everything consistent and also turn them into tiling textures that I can use throughout the level. Another huge deal here was the buttons, the detailing tool that I built with Houdini to procedurally lay out these buttons and switches and all that kind of stuff. I knew I was going to use that all over the rest of the scene, which I did. And so I wanted to get that right so that I could start repeating it and get all the assets set up for that. It's also pretty close to the camera, so I wanted to kind of make sure that while I was still fresh, I put some detail into that stuff and didn't just kind of like, half-ass it like I would at the end. And speaking of which, the character model was another one that I did early because it's pretty involved and I suck at characters and animation. I knew that I did not want to animate this last when I'm miles past my deadline, sick of the project, all that stuff. And the last one, as I mentioned, was the tree. I think it's really important in the shot and it's pretty vastly different than anything else. So I really wanted to get the look of that right and kind of, concentrate on it in the beginning when I was still super excited about this and then move on to everything else. Making this console was really fun. I started by modeling the frame of the console by hand. I just wanted to have control over the layout there. But what was really interesting about this process was building this button detailer tool in Houdini. So what I did here was I just modeled the small library of buttons, knobs, switches, all that good stuff that the Houdini tool would then scatter across the surface that I defined by just choosing primitives on the console. And that tool, which I'll probably do a separate tutorial on, basically controls things like the label. It moves the UV around so that every button has a different label. The light color, all of them are a little bit different. And of course the placement and distribution of those. For making the character, I wanted to do as little as possible while still trying to make it look awesome. She is basically there to sort of just sell the fact that there's a person operating these things. But since she's in a close-up, I kind of wanted to make it look really good. And so what I did was use Character Creator 4. It comes with a lot of great tools for Unreal Engine, auto setup, and these like skin and hair shaders that look awesome out of the box. And so I wanted to take advantage of all of that while doing this. And she doesn't need to look super special. She just needs to look like a good looking human. For her clothes, I decided to buy a jumpsuit. It was like $5, and retexture it versus making one from scratch in Marvelous Designer or something. I love Marvelous, but I just didn't have the time in this project. And the character isn't quite the focus. It's just, again, sort of just there to sell that there's humans involved in this process of monitoring this tree for whatever reason they're doing that. Some of the fun things that I found were physics hair is a real pain in the ass. I've done cloth simulations before in Unreal, but I've not ever applied it to hair. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get that to look good, but I ultimately decided that that was going to be a rabbit hole, and that I could kind of make this static hair look better if I just, painted the vertex weights so that they would follow her head around, and I shortened her hair a little bit so it didn't clip through her collar. So overall, pretty happy with that. The process of making the tree was actually pretty straightforward. I just used SpeedTree, which is my favorite program for modeling trees or plants of any kind. And with SpeedTree, you can be very specific, or you can kind of just let nature take its course here and randomize things until they look good, which is what I did a lot for this. I focused on the shapes that I wanted. I wanted this little crook in the trunk to make it look a little bit like a bonsai tree or something like that. But other than that, I was pretty happy with just kind of randomizing where the branches went. I played around a lot with the density of the leaves. They were a little bit too thick at first, and just kind of dialed in that purple color using a maple leaf card from Megascans as my leaf card. Trim sheets were a huge part of this project. I try to make them as early in the project as I can because they help you add a ton of detail to the environment really quickly. So once I made these trim sheets, started using them, the environment came together really quickly. You can also keep your style consistent because you're using the same thing to sort of generate a lot of details in the environment. Trim sheets for games are very performance friendly, since a lot of things can use just one shader. If you got a trim sheet, you can just keep using it on different assets versus making a whole bunch of different tiling materials. I had 3 main trim sheets for this project. One was for the screens, sort of like an emissive trim. The other was hardware, which is for most of these like rack things that are in the background. And then one that was just a normal, so I could add things like panels and lines and stuff to just meshes that would otherwise be pretty boring. For the modular assets here, as in things that repeat in the level, there aren't that many. For example, there's one wall, which I just rotated and stuff because there's a lot of detail on here from the trim sheet. The floor, which you can barely see in the shot, is just this like industrial, terrible carpet. Ceiling is made up of just a few modules. I've got beams here, which are most of the structure and serve as transitions between these walls, which would otherwise be these hard edges, which doesn't look good. Over here, I've got just an empty server cabinet that I filled with these things, and 2 that are just sort of like generic, which I scaled and flipped around. This is mostly made, again, from the trim sheet. I've got this tape machine model here, which is actually a blueprint. And that blueprint allows me to control things like the rotation speed of the reels, the direction those move in, the offsets so they don't all look the same when they're rotating, and then the random start and stop of the reels when they're moving. These old tape drives would just sort of stop and start. This pipe is from Megascans, and this is just a simple cable spline tool from an old project that I had for these like cables that kind of hang in different places. Obviously, there are quite a few of these. Again, all of these are made from a trim sheet, really. So these are just like simple cubes that have one face, UV'd with that trim sheet, and those get stacked up in these server cabinets. And then for the console, these were actually parts of the console, but I ended up making them sort of separate from it, so that I could use them in different parts of the scene where I needed more like a foreground asset. Because you can, from the background, these look okay, but up close you can kind of tell that they're just like, the most of that detail is being handled by a normal map, which doesn't look terrific if you're like that close to it. So those are the modular pieces of the kit. The last part of the project was just lighting and rendering. The lighting is pretty standard here. I did use a lot of lights, and I ended up breaking each shot into a separate scene so I could have control over the layout and the lighting on a per shot basis. There are ways to set that up with sequencer, like shot specific lighting and all that stuff, but it was just easier to break it into shot specific maps for this. Rendering. Jesus Elizabeth Christ, everyone, did I have a lot of problems here, but I managed to fix or hide them, and I ultimately came out on top. I also decided at the absolute last minute I wanted that coffee steam, so I made a quick VFX asset with a Houdini smoke sim and just composited it in with Nuke. And that's pretty much it. Like I said, I'll probably do some individual tutorials on parts of the shot. And yeah, thanks for watching.